Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded Podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping your future. Simon, today I'd like to discuss a topic that I think is going to be of interest to a lot of the listeners and viewers of our show. Will younger Australians, the younger generations, be better off than their parents? Look, it used to be a question with a simple answer. In the past, every generation was better off, but today the path to prosperity seems a little bit murkier than ever. So I'd like to explore whether today's youth are facing a downgrade or whether they're going to have a different journey to their parents. So I believe this will be a valuable show if you're a business person wanting to understand what the future holds for your potential clients, whether you're a planner, whether you're an investor, understanding what's going to happen in the world. So let's have a talk about what's ahead, Simon.
Absolutely. Let's see how our young folks will fare in the future.
Well, let's start with some context. According to the UBS World Wealth Report, it I think used to be called Credit Suisse, but they've now amalgamated. Our wealth in Australia increased 11% in 2024. And depending upon how you measure it, Australia ranks second globally in terms of median wealth per adult. Now, that's talking about money. We know true wealth has a lot more to do than with money. However, what this study showed was Australia's wealth is concentrated in the hands of baby boomers. We've discussed baby boomers before. So if you're new to this podcast and you haven't listened to the show about the various generations and about the baby boomers passing on wealth to future generations, please, wherever you're listening to this, finish this show first, go back and subscribe to the show and have a look at some of the previous shows. But as I was starting to say, baby boomers today control half of Australia's private wealth, despite representing only a quarter of the population. And there are some good reasons why that's happened, Simon.
Most certainly. So when we talk about wealth, though, there are always a couple of asterisks that we need to add, because Australia looks artificially wonderful in wealth reports by definition. First and foremost, we own our superannuation. So our retirement savings, they are counted into our wealth. Whereas in a country like Germany that doesn't have a superannuation system, there is one big state-owned bucket and you pay out pensions, so to speak, then you can't have this. This isn't counted to your wealth. So therefore you look poorer on average. And of course, in Australia, the biggest chunk of wealth for a family or individual tends to be the house.
Yes.
And so if the housing market is really big, expensive, as it is in Australia at the moment, then of course you look even wealthier. But this isn't capital that you can use to throw around. This is, if this was just pure cash that you had, it would be more useful in the immediate moment. So that's the legal asterisks about wealth and why Australia is as good as it looks in those rankings. But ultimately, Australia is a wealthy nation, even disregarding the methodology of this thing. And the pain point that you looked at or that you hinted here is the younger generations now, they most likely, or they constantly hear that they won't be as rich, as well off as their parents. And that is a big shift in Australian society, because so far we more or less had a contract, implicit understanding that every generation does their best. They do their best to put their kids through school, to create a container of a government, of an economy that the next generation can actually utilize to create even more wealth and prosperity. And when this is the case, when each generation is richer than the generation before them, then it is quite easy to feel positive and warm about the past generation. You then, when they reach old age, you automatically are guaranteed to extend your charity towards them. So that worked. Now that we see this first with the millennials, the kids of the baby boomers that are statistically speaking less well off than the boomers, they certainly feel this way, that changes. So this is a generation that is worse off than the previous generations. And then they feel kind of cheated. So they essentially then they extend envy and a bit of, disregard to the older generation. And that creates intergenerational conflict. It's a very, very hot topic in Australia. It's a very easy way of creating clicks online is to have boomers bash against millennials and vice versa. That's easy. And that's not helpful for society. So it is better for society if you become slightly richer, slightly better off year after year, decade after decade. But it's, of course, easier said than done. And at the
Well,
moment,
it's not unfair that the baby boomers have got more wealth. It reflects a lifetime of accumulation, but it is unusual that the next generation doesn't feel they're going to be able to attain the wealth.
exactly, that's the shift. So ideally, if you play your cards right, you should get richer because ultimately you do smart things with your wealth. You don't consume all the income that you create. You invest it, and this investment adds to your wealth, and you accrue assets throughout life, so you get richer. So that makes sense so far. But back in the day, your house wasn't worth all that much. It wasn't a speculative asset, so that wouldn't have helped you to create wealth. And this has been the case now. But I would always say I would rather disregard the house as a store of wealth, because we discussed it in our downsizing episodes. Baby boomer can only utilize the wealth of the house if they sell it. And if they're not attractive options to downsize into, you don't sell the house. And then your housing wealth, your wonderful statistical wealth, is worth nothing, which is the reason why we have so many widows in Australia living in multi-million-dollar houses, living on meagerly pensions, which is just stupid, financially speaking. If they choose to do so, it's all wonderful. But ultimately, it's a bit of a bizarre twist.
Well, let's have a look at some of the things that have changed and why it's possible that the next generation will be a bit more challenged. First of all, it's interesting that younger Australians are more educated than ever. We know a much larger percentage go to finish year 12, and a big percentage go to university compared to their parents and their grandparents. But that has also had a trade-off, because a lot of them have had a debt against this. It does impact how they spend the first years of their lives. Also, I think it's changed some of the ways they look at relationships, home ownership, and even when they start a family, Simon.
If we look at the university narrative, that changed completely. Back in the day, anyone who got a uni degree done really well of it. If there was only 10-20% of Australian society that goes to university, having such a degree on your wall put you into the intellectual elite of this country. You really stood out. Now half of us get a uni degree. Wow. So that means you're part of the top 50%. So it really waters down the specialness, the uniqueness of your degree. And all the while, we started to charge ever more money for it. So not only is a degree worth less money, less career potential, it also loads you up with quite a bit of debt. And it's not a good deal. So we made uni degrees less attractive, but we also put it as a prerequisite for more and more jobs. There were plenty of jobs in Australia that didn't need a university degree in the past, but now it became more and more a prerequisite to have a uni degree to get this job. This was partially due to very, very lazy employers who needed a shorthand. There are so many candidates for a job, and you need to filter it out. And one good filter is to say uni, yes or no. Then you're studious enough to sit through 4 years of study to endure this stuff. So you're probably capable. But does it actually mean that you are more capable? And I think more and more employers go away from this. For a while, we overcompensated for it and said, okay, a bachelor isn't enough. We need a master's degree. There were even plenty of people who took a PhD degree without ever wanting to work in academia, which is what this initially was intended to do.
Yes.
And so, okay, so that's difficult. But then some employers actually, they now look down upon master's students in their graduate intake, because they kind of know that you have to give a master's student a bit more money than a bachelor's degree holder in your graduate level intake. And they said that's not worth it, because this person might have 2 years worth of study for their master's, but that doesn't make them a better young worker.
It's not practical experience, is it?
No, it is not. And if you look at the big employers, I'm thinking about a KPMG, a NAB, a PwC. These big firms, they increasingly figure out, no, we teach you most of the stuff anyways. We teach you the NAB way, the Deloitte way. We are confident enough in our internal training and upskilling that we get a capable and motivated young person up to scratch in no time. So no need for a master's. So I would at the moment discourage young people from getting a master's, because this would mean they can enter the full-time employment 2 years earlier. And ultimately, the master's doesn't translate into more pay. And you have less debt against your name as well. So that'd be my personal general career advice. If you have a specialist desire or very specific desire that needs a degree, of course, go for it. But For someone who doesn't have a clue what they want to do, any type of bachelor's degree will be absolutely sufficient to tick all the boxes with the employers.
Well, I guess one of the reasons that we believe the next generation may be a little bit more challenged financially is even though they start off earning similar wages or even more than people that came before them, I was interested to read that, in fact, over the last 20 years or so, income growth for people under 40 has fallen dramatically. It hasn't grown as much as it did in the past, Simon.
Yeah, and so it depends on, of course, who you're looking at the moment. So the reason is that the millennials, so people born in the 80s and 90s, the kids of the baby boomers, they entered the world of work all at the same time as a big cohort. And so you had the effect, and also during the during economic downturns, after the end of the mining boom and so forth, the global financial crisis. So if heaps of people entering, they drive wages down. And so lower wages, why would you pay them more if there are plenty of them? The market reacts to these demographic realities.
Look, nowhere is the generation gap even more visible, though, Simon, than home ownership. Home ownership rates amongst the people in their 20s and early 30s has plummeted. We've discussed that before in previous episodes of Demographics Decoded. By the way, if you're new to this show, if you don't follow it yet, please stop for a second, click on the follow or subscribe button, but also go back to previous episodes. Each one is a lesson on the demographic changes that are going to shape our future. And we've talked about how various generations are putting down their roots, forming a family, buying a home later in life. And there's many reasons for that. But I guess what it means is that they're not building their wealth as early in their lives.
So when you delay partnering up, when you delay marriage, you delay first home buying, even if it wasn't just price-based, even if housing affordability was the same, you start accruing the benefits of owning a home later in life. Of course, we also created an environment where housing became ever more expensive. So what we have people renting for longer. That's when you pay the landlord and you start accruing this wealth of your home later in life. So that's all of those things come together. And we'd say, well, why aren't young people making babies sooner in life? Move into houses, move to different geographies, move further away, demand to live in cheaper areas. That's not that easy. Market developers decide where housing is being offered as well. And we have a shortage of housing. So whatever you build goes, and prices are not coming down because of this insane shortfall of housing supply. That trend is probably going to continue for a while, I would say. And the millennials were hurt by this. And because the millennials were hurt by this development, the young Gen Zs, the people born after the year 2000, they think that they will be hit in much the same way, that the negative trend of affordability will hit them much the same, probably much harder. And I would say that while I have no positive news stories for the millennials out there, I do have a couple of positive stories for the young Gen Zs that are thinking about their wealth journey.
What are they then, Simon?
Well, the first thing is to remember that Gen Z is a small generation that are entering the world of work right now. So that means they enter the world of work when employers are a bit desperate. So they can charge higher wages from their employers. So the Gen Zs start their career with relatively higher wages. And you say, that's cool. That's a win. Plus, no two opinions about this. I think that's obviously a positive story for them. And then you go, well, but isn't housing affordability getting even worse and they can't actually afford it? It's like, yeah, to be honest, in the next 10 years or so, the Gen Zs are not making babies just yet. So they're also not that cashed up yet to buy a house. So you will then be renting for the next 10 years. But just around the time that you want to make babies in your early 30s, mid 30s, we have baby boomers die at stage. So that means the baby boomer homes enter the market, which ultimately helps the Gen Z.
Interesting.
And so not only do Gen Zs benefit from the increased housing stock, well, they don't benefit directly to begin with, because the housing stock that the boomers leave behind, that is too expensive for the Gen Z first home buyers. But most likely the millennials will buy these houses as upgrader homes in the 2040s or thereabouts. That, of course, frees up the current millennial homes on the urban fringe for Gen Z at relatively decent rates. We're not talking about cheap housing. We're talking about less unaffordable housing. So ultimately, this is a good news story for Gen Z. On top of this, we can, of course, speculate that in 10 years' time, certain types of policies that we put into place right now might actually start to help the population. We're talking about something like massively building out the build-to-rent sector. And the idea behind this, at least theoretically, is that there is more rental stock available, which should drive rents down, which should mean that you pay less.
My initial question, Simon, was what will the experience be for young Australians of today? Are they going to be better off than previous generations? And maybe we should make it clear there isn't one single youth experience. For example, women are earning more than their male peers early in careers at the moment. I guess that's driven by higher education and a growth in female-dominated sectors like the healthcare. But unfortunately, also, the younger generations are experiencing declining mental health, higher levels of loneliness, and in fact, it also depends upon where the younger people live. We've discussed in previous episodes before that there's more unemployment, fewer opportunities in regional Australia as well, where there's not as much employment, maybe not as high education rate, and rising levels of disengagement. So the divide doesn't just stop there. It also depends upon where you are in that age group of younger Australians as well.
Exactly. These experiences are never uniform. So there's so many different demographic cuts and slices that then decide, are you better off than your parents? But if we look at the whole generation, I'd say it's probably a big ask to say that they will be better off. So I'd say, will the young Gen Zs of today be better off as their Gen X parents? I was like, ooh, that's a bit difficult to forecast, because ultimately Gen X at the moment is burning money left, right, and center. They have financially dependent children. They have a overextended mortgage during the pandemic years when interest rates were low, and they have financially or care dependent parents as well. So that's very tough for Gen X. So they burned through a bit of wealth. So how much wealth could then the young Gen Zs be inheriting in a couple of decades when their Gen X parents are dying? It remains to be seen. And at the moment, there is quite a bit of an argument to say they might not ultimately benefit from this all that much. But of course, as people die, the wealth transfer is always theoretically an opportunity to make sure that the younger generations are better off, because there is so much accrued wealth in super accounts in the form of housing wealth that is being pushed down to the next generation. And
well, Australia is really on the brink of the biggest wealth transfer in history. Inheritances are expected to quadruple by between now and 2050. There's been various estimates, but it's somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion of wealth is going to be transferred to younger Australians over the next couple of decades as the baby boomers die off, and a lot of that will be in their homes. We've had episodes of this in the past. So if you're interested in what this is going to mean for the future, go and download one of our past episodes. But look, this won't necessarily be passed on to Gen Zs or millennials anytime soon. It'll be, I guess, passed on to their parents. So the younger generations, as you were hinting, are going to miss out on this. But in the meantime, I think they've got something that previous generations haven't got. Is it good or bad? They've got technology. So we're asking, are they better off or not? Well, I would have said a few years ago, yes, we are better off having a smartphone. But now that I see the younger generations on them the whole time and glued to them, maybe that's not such a good thing after all.
Yes. So what we would be seeing is that technology takes a while of getting used to. And we see this in social media, where I'm 42 and my bunch would have been the first cohort that has been on social media, where we know MySpace and then Facebook became first in my cohort took on those things, and we overshared quite heavily on Facebook and MySpace. And then younger people, they stopped doing that. They then created a much more careful relationship to this, where they still overshare, but they overshared on Snapchat, on things where the data isn't stored forever. So we became a bit wiser with it. And then we look at the young Gen Zs at the moment. This is the first generation that got mobile phones as soon as they hit their formative years in their early
Yes.
teens. And they became absolutely addicted. They get all the benefits, but mostly all the negative things of this, in terms of screen addiction, in terms of negative self-worth, because you consume so much image-based social media that, particularly in young women, drives down or drives a negative self-image. It's very difficult to deal with this. That said, I would argue that the next cohort, so we're talking about the 5-year-olds of today, that they will be smarter about this because the parents will be smart about it. They will
Yes.
guide them a bit more about this. So I don't think we can always assume a straight line of just catastrophe to yet another catastrophe. But we do adjust as humans. Even if you're too pessimistic, you don't want to hear this. You do like the doom and gloom story then. But we will use technology a bit better. So I'm still a technology optimist that I think ultimately we can use it to make our lives better.
Also, in some ways, the younger generations will be better off because of the technology. But Simon, in my mind, they've also inherited a suite of new problems, maybe because of all these extra choices, their social media addiction, but there also seems to be increased anxiety and declining mental well-being. Mental health scores for young women in particular have fallen significantly over the last decade, and men are also showing signs of risky behaviour, gambling. And interestingly, from what I read when I was wanting to have a chat with you about this, is online betting and pokies is more an addiction in younger males.
It's terrible. So there's so many things that need to be regulated to save our young folks, like online gambling or sports betting. Has no positive effect. There's nothing to be gained there from a mental health perspective for anyone. You get the high of an addiction. Congratulations, yeah, well done. Is it a bit harmless if you only waste a couple of bucks? Maybe, but it's rewiring your brain. It's rewiring the way that you watch sports. You focus on weird stuff, and it's not necessarily helpful. And women, young women in particular, so it's online games, online gamblings, pornography that young men get addicted to in technology. And women emphasize the social aspects of social media, the visual aspects of social media. So they dominate TikTok and Instagram, visual platforms. And this is absolute poison to their self-image, which translates
Yes.
into rapidly declining mental health. As you go, well, we know this, but it's very, very hard to let go of these technologies because they are designed by the most capable minds to be hyper addictive. The Facebook files have plenty of data out there that they know how they're harming teens, and they deliberately do it because it is selling great ad revenue. These are god-awful companies. This is absolutely terrible stuff that is being done on the back of the mental health of vulnerable populations. And we are now reining them in. We now see that South Australia outlaws social media for, I think, under 16-year-olds, which is all the research suggests that they are right. That, of course, puts South Australia and Australia as a whole into the bad books of Meta and Google or whatever, all those big, powerful social media companies. So that's not helpful to have this fight. But I think we are, in this particular aspect, we are on the money. We are following the data as a government. So big shout out to South Australia there to actually push this thing through because you are, of course, poking the bear. In taking on those big players, but you're ultimately doing this to benefit the mental health of your young population. This is good stuff. This needs to be applauded, and I want to see more of this. And I don't want to hear geopolitical stuff about, we can't anger the Americans and their big, powerful companies. Like, nah, that's just fine for us. We need to be self-confident enough that we are on the right side. A bit of self-righteousness here is quite important, that we have data that points clearly to this stuff being harmful to young people, and we have a level of duty to care for our young folks.
I fully agree. Now, Simon, of the Demographics Group, you advise businesses, institutions, organizations, government authorities as well. Clearly, you look at all this demographics. What do you do if somebody's interested in understanding how your team can help?
Yeah, we always have a chat with them. So anyone who might think that your company might benefit from really understanding your sector through the demographic lens, reach out on my LinkedIn, on my company website.
I'll leave a link in the show notes, Simon.
Fantastic. Yeah, just reach out and we have a chat. Presentations, events, boardroom meetings, all of these things are opportunities for us to discuss your business, your local government area, whatever it is, through the demographic lens. And these are, of course, much more specific data sets that we're using than what we do in the podcast is always the big national picture.
Yes.
Sometimes we might dive into a smaller, more specific topic, but ultimately we try to understand this as a whole of society perspective here, which I think hopefully helps our listeners to understand Australia a bit more. They'll have their own understanding about their industry, their business, but hopefully we add a bit of understanding from the demographic perspective.
Well, I think it was an interesting conversation, Simon. So, are the younger generation going to be better off or not? I guess it depends if we're measuring raw education levels, life expectancy, access to digital tools. Yes, young Australians are going to have an edge over previous generations. But if we're talking about financial independence, home ownership, relationship stability, mental well-being, many young Australians are going to face a rougher road than the generations before them. But I think as we were talking it through, I realized it's really actually not a story of decline, but it is of delay. They are still living in the best country in the world, if we talk about younger Australians, and I would argue at the best time in history. So sure, life milestones are being pushed back, they're being reshaped, but I guess even reimagined in some ways. But the future looks bright, doesn't it, Simon?
It does. And even if you just look at simple stuff like medicine, there is nothing that suggests that ultimately the medical technological advances should make your life worse. I'm seeing wonderful developments there where we actually, most importantly, we want to increase the health span. That's the idea of like, yeah, life expectancy is nice, but what do you want to live to 100 if the last 20 years of your life are pain and misery? So you don't want that. You want to have the ill health component as short as possible. And so far, if we think about individualized medicine, these kind of things that are at least thinkable at the moment, they could help the young people of today quite potentially, quite a lot. So that'd be quite awesome to live in this kind of environment.
Well, if you enjoyed our chat today and you don't currently subscribe or follow the show, click on the little follow or subscribe button, depending upon the app you're watching or listening to us, and you'll get our show once a week. Please do us a favor. Simon and I enjoy bringing you this information to help you understand what the future holds for you, but we'd like to get the message to more people, and we love seeing how our audience keeps growing. So please, somebody about the show, just like somebody probably told you about this, help somebody else get this information as well. Simon, thanks a lot. I look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Fantastic. I'll catch you next week, Michael.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.